The stray black cat didn't make a sound, not a single meow, as it followed the little girl all the way to the schoolyard fence. It just walked, a silent, living shadow 10 paces behind her, its green eyes fixed on the small, slumped shoulders of a child who thought she was completely alone. It was the first Monday of October, and the air had turned sharp overnight. It carried the smell of wood smoke from a neighbor's chimney, and the dry, dusty scent of fallen leaves gathering in the gutters. For 8-year-old Maya, the walk to school was the longest 5 blocks of her life. It was a parade of everything she didn't have anymore. She kept her eyes on the cracks in the sidewalk, counting them, using them as a ladder to lower herself into the quiet world inside her head. A world where her mom's car was still in the driveway, where her lunchbox still held a note in that familiar looping handwriting. She didn't look up. She didn't see the cat. She was too busy trying not to feel the enormous, suffocating weight of the empty space beside her. The cat, though, saw everything. It had been lurking around their street for weeks, a sliver of negative space against the overgrown lilac bushes. Most people never noticed it. It was the kind of cat that existed in peripheral vision, a flicker of movement you'd dismiss as a trick of the light. But it noticed Maya. It watched her from under parked cars as she trudged home from the bus stop each afternoon, her head down, her steps slow. It watched her father, a man whose own shoulders seemed to be permanently bent under an invisible weight, as he stood on the porch some evenings, just staring at the empty street as the dusk settled around him like ash. The cat's world was a map of small dangers and small comforts. The cold engine block of Mr. Gable's pickup truck a few doors down, still warm long after he'd left for work. The drip from the air conditioning unit behind the Thai restaurant that pooled into a perfect fresh puddle. The dangerous stretch of open lawn belonging to the house with the yappy terrier. It knew the rhythm of the street, the coming and going of its human giants, their moods written in the sound of their footsteps and the set of their jaws. And in the rhythm of this particular house, this little girl and her father, it sensed a silence that was different, a deep, resonant ache that echoed its own solitary existence. That Monday morning, Maya's dad had kissed her forehead on the porch. His smile was a thin, fragile thing. "Have a good day, sweetheart. I'll be right here waiting at 3:15. He said it like a promise he was desperately trying to keep. She just nodded, her small fingers tightening on the strap of her backpack, the one her mom had let her pick out last spring, covered in rainbows and unicorns. It felt like a relic from another lifetime, a skin she'd outgrown but was forced to wear. She was about halfway to school, lost in the memory of her mother's laugh, a sound that was starting to get fuzzy around the edges, like a worn photograph. A sudden gust of wind, cold and insistent, rattled the branches of a massive oak tree above her, shaking loose a shower of acorns that pattered onto the sidewalk like hail. The noise startled her, jerking her out of her thoughts and into the present moment. She stopped walking, and for the first time she heard it, the soft, almost imperceptible scuff of paws on pavement behind her. She turned, and there it was, the black cat. It froze mid-step, one paw lifted off the ground. Its body was lean, all sinew and sharp angles under a coat that was thick but lacked the healthy sheen of a pet. This was a working cat, a surviving cat. Its ears were nicked, little pieces missing from a lifetime of narrow escapes, but its eyes were the most vivid, intelligent green Maya had ever seen. They weren't wild or scared. They were calm, deep. They held her gaze without blinking. Maya held her breath. She'd seen cats before, of course. Mrs. Donnelly's fat orange tabby sunned itself on their driveway wall every afternoon. But this was different. This cat was looking at her. Not through her, not past her, at her. It was a look that felt like a question. For a long moment, they just stood there. On the sidewalk, a little girl and a stray cat, suspended in the crisp autumn air. The world seemed to hold its breath with them. A yellow school bus rumbled past, but neither of them flinched. The cat's tail gave the faintest, most tentative twitch at the very tip. Maya, moving slowly so as not to scare it, shifted her backpack on her shoulders. The movement broke the spell. The cat dropped its paw, took a single delicate step backward, but it didn't run. It didn't bolt into the bushes. It just waited, watching to see what she would do. Maya's heart was beating a little faster. A tiny, fragile spark of curiosity, a feeling she hadn't felt in weeks, flickered to life in her chest. She took a small, experimental step forward. The cat didn't move. She took another. She heard the soft patter of its footsteps as it began to follow again, maintaining its exact 10-pace distance. And so they continued, this silent, strange procession. The little girl, a solitary figure in a too-bright backpack, and her dark, quiet guardian. They walked past houses with pumpkins on the steps, past yards decorated with plastic skeletons. A world preparing for a holiday that felt a million miles away from Maya's reality. She kept glancing back, half expecting the cat to be gone, to have vanished as mysteriously as it had appeared. But it was always there, a constant, shadowy companion, its green eyes a fixed point in her wobbling universe. When they reached the chain-link fence of Northwood Elementary, the noise of the schoolyard hit them like a wall. The shrieks of children, playing tag, the thump of a basketball, the shrill whistle of a monitor. Maya hesitated at the gate, her social anxiety, which had grown tenfold since the funeral, coiling tightly in her stomach. She hated this part of the day, the loud, chaotic transition from the quiet of her walk to the overwhelming buzz of hundreds of kids. She turned for one last look at the cat. It had stopped at the edge of the school property, right where the grass met the sidewalk. It sat down, wrapping its tail neatly around its feet. It wasn't looking at the other children. It wasn't scanning for danger or food. It was looking directly at her. It held her gaze for 1, 2, 3 seconds. Then it did something extraordinary. It very slowly, very deliberately closed its eyes. Not a blink. A long, slow, purposeful closing. It held them shut for a moment, then opened them again, still looking right at her. It felt like a message. A silent, "It's okay, I'm here." A teacher's aide called her name. "Maya! Come on in, honey, bell's about to ring." Maya gave the cat one last wondering look, then pushed through the gate, letting the tide of kids carry her toward the big brick building. She didn't see the cat rise, stretch, and then leap with effortless grace onto the low brick wall that bordered the schoolyard. It found a spot in a patch of weak sunlight, curled up, and settled in, its watchful eyes fixed on the door Maya had disappeared through. It had no food bowl here, no warm bed. It had a purpose, and it would wait. Back in class, Maya took her seat by the window. Mrs. Welty was taking attendance, her voice a pleasant drone. Maya usually spent this time tracing the patterns in the wood of her desk, trying to make herself small. But today she found herself looking out the window, down toward the front of the school. She couldn't see the wall from here, but she knew. She just knew the cat was still there. That slow blink replayed in her mind. It had felt like a secret. A tiny, warm stone of a secret placed right in the center of her palm. Something she could close her fingers around and hold on to. For the first time in a long time, the heavy, leaden feeling in her chest felt just a little bit lighter. She didn't know why the cat had followed her. She didn't know what it wanted. She only knew that for 20 minutes that morning, she hadn't been alone. And the quiet knowledge, warm and fragile, settled in her heart. Something had begun. You're here listening, and that means more than you know. If you feel safe in these stories, your one subscribe helps me keep this quiet little corner alive. Thank you for being part of this peaceful world. The next morning, Maya's first conscious thought wasn't the dull, familiar ache of waking up to a world that felt wrong. It was a question, a little thread of curiosity pulling at the edge of her mind. Would it be there? She got dressed quickly, pulling on a sweatshirt that still carried the faint, fading scent of her mother's perfume from a hug months ago. She didn't tell her dad. This was her secret. A small, fragile thing she wanted to keep close, to protect, in case it decided to vanish. She stood on the porch, her breath making little clouds in the cold air. Her dad handed her the lunchbox he'd packed. "Have a good day, kiddo," he said, his voice still rough with sleep and a sadness he tried to hide. She nodded, her eyes already scanning the street. She walked down the steps, her heart doing a nervous little tap dance against her ribs. She made it to the sidewalk. She counted 5 cracks. She took a breath and dared to look back. And there it was. Not on the sidewalk behind her, but sitting perfectly still under the rusty red pickup truck parked 2 houses down. Just a pair of green eyes glowing in the shadowy space between the tires. It was waiting. It had been waiting for her. A feeling, warm and bright, fizzed through her chest, so unfamiliar it was almost startling. It was hope. This became the new routine. Every morning, the cat would be there. It never waited on their lawn, never came too close to the house. It was always at a distance, a sentinel in the periphery. Under the pickup truck, on the low stone wall of the abandoned property, perched on the closed lid of a garbage can, still and regal as a statue. It would watch her come out, watch her receive her kiss from her dad, and then, as she started her walk, it would melt out of its hiding spot and fall into step behind her, that same 10-pace shadow. The walks changed. They were no longer a lonely trudge through a landscape of grief. They became a silent communion. Maya started to notice things she could whisper to it in her head. Look, the maple tree on the corner is almost completely red now. Or, Mrs. Gable's wind chime is missing a tube. That's why it sounds so funny. She'd glance back, and the cat would be there, its ears swiveling, taking in the same world she was. It felt like sharing. She started leaving little offerings. The first was a piece of turkey from her sandwich, left on a clean napkin on the sidewalk one afternoon after school. She walked away quickly, her stomach clenched, afraid she'd insulted it, scared it would be gone forever. The next morning, the napkin was gone, and the cat was there. The offering had been accepted. Her dad noticed a change. It was subtle. She wasn't suddenly happy. That wasn't a shape that fit her anymore. But the overwhelming weight of her sadness seemed to have textured. There were small moments of light peeking through. One evening at dinner she said, "The black cat was under Mr. Gable's truck again." She said it casually, pushing a pea around her plate. Her dad looked up, surprised. "Yeah? The scrappy one? It's been around for a while. Probably full of fleas, honey. Don't get too close." It was a practical dad thing to say, a worry spoken from a place of love. Maya just nodded. He didn't understand. This wasn't about getting close. This was about being seen. The cat, for its part, revealed its personality in tiny incremental gestures. It was a creature of profound patience and unshakable routine. It never meowed. Its communication was all in the tilt of a head, the flick of an ear, the intensity of its gaze. Maya learned its language. A rapid twitch of the tail tip meant it was alert, maybe a dog barking a street over. A slow, sweeping swish meant it was relaxed, content to just amble along behind her. And the blinking. The slow blink became their secret handshake. Every time they reached the school fence, Maya would turn. The cat would sit, and it would deliver that slow, deliberate closing of its eyes. She started doing it back. Standing there on the other side of the chain link, she'd close her own eyes slowly, then open them. The cat would just watch, its head slightly cocked. It was a ritual, a tiny, silent promise made and remade every single day. "I see you. I'm here." One Thursday, it rained. Not a storm, but a cold, persistent drizzle that soaked through everything. Maya pulled her hood up, her shoulders hunching against the wet. She dreaded the walk. She was sure the cat, a creature of obvious survival and sense, would be tucked away somewhere dry. What did it care about a silent walk with a sad little girl when there were dry eaves to hide under? But when she stepped off her porch and looked toward the pickup truck, the green eyes were there. They seemed brighter in the gray gloom. The cat was soaked, its black fur plastered to its body, making it look even thinner, more like a collection of bones and willpower than an animal. But it was there. Water dripped from its whiskers. It shook one paw, then another, clearly disliking the wet, but it didn't abandon its post. It followed her, a sodden shadow through the rain. Maya's throat got tight. This creature, this independent wild thing, was getting soaked to the skin for her. It was choosing the misery of a cold, wet walk just to walk with her. The weight of that choice, the sheer, inexplicable loyalty of it, landed in her heart with an almost physical force. She stopped under the thick, sheltering branches of the big oak tree halfway to school. The cat stopped too, sitting on the wet sidewalk, waiting. "You're all wet," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the patter of rain on the leaves. Above, the cat just looked at her, water dripping from its chin. She felt a surge of something brave. Slowly, so slowly, she crouched down, making herself small. She didn't reach out. She just stayed there, crouched in the rain, reducing the distance between them from 10 paces to maybe 5. The cat watched her, every muscle alert. Its ears were pricked forward, but not flat in fear. It was assessing. Its gaze flicked from her eyes to her empty hands and back again. The rain continued to fall. A car swished by on the wet street, its tires hissing. And then the cat did something it had never done before. It lowered its head, almost a ducking motion, and then lifted it again. It took a single, hesitant step forward. Then another. It closed the 5-pace gap to 4. Then 3. Maya held her breath. She could see individual droplets of water caught on its fur like tiny diamonds. She could see the subtle rise and fall of its breathing. She could see a small, pale scar cutting through the fur above its left eye. It stopped 2 paces away, so close. It looked up at her, its green eyes unblinking. This wasn't like the slow, trusting blink from the school fence. This was different. This was a choice made in the open, in the discomfort of the rain, with nowhere to hide. It was a monumental risk for a creature that lived by avoiding risk. It didn't come closer. It didn't rub against her. It didn't meow. It just stood there, in the rain, and trusted her enough to simply be near. To break the invisible barrier it had so carefully maintained for weeks. The moment hung there, fragile and perfect. The sound of the rain, the smell of wet pavement and damp earth, the sight of this beautiful, bedraggled creature choosing to share her space, it was the most profound gift she had received since her world had fallen apart. A distant bell rang from the direction of the school. The spell was broken, but gently, like a bubble landing on soft grass. The cat took a graceful step backward, then turned and trotted to its usual following distance, as if resetting the terms of their agreement. The closeness had been offered and accepted. The rules could now return to normal. Maya stood up, her knees aching from crouching. She didn't say anything. She just looked at the cat, hoping her eyes could convey what her words couldn't. "Thank you." She continued her walk to school, the rain feeling less cold, the world feeling less hostile. She had shared a moment of quiet understanding with another living soul. She had made a friend. That afternoon, she told her dad she wanted to buy a can of tuna at the store. He looked at her, a question in his eyes. "Tuna? Since when do you like tuna?" "It's not for me," she said simply. He didn't push. He just nodded, and when they went to the grocery store, he put a 2-pack of tuna and water into the cart. He was learning too, learning to navigate the new, quiet contours of his daughter's heart. The next morning was clear and bright, the world washed clean. Maya came out with a small blue bowl from the kitchen and the opened can of tuna. She placed it carefully on the sidewalk near the pickup truck, then walked back to her porch steps to wait. The cat emerged, its fur fluffy and dry again. It approached the bowl with visible caution, its nose twitching. It circled it once, then twice. It looked at Maya, then back at the bowl. Then it bent its head and began to eat, not with frantic hunger, but with a deliberate, grateful pace. Maya watched from the steps, her chin resting on her knees, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. The bond was no longer a thread. It was a rope, strong and sure, woven from silent walks, slow blinks, shared rain, and now a gift of tuna. It was a thing built not in grand gestures, but in the smallest, quietest moments of showing up. Have you ever had an animal wait for you, even when you didn't ask them to? It's a humbling thing. It chips away at the loneliness of being human. For Maya, in the deepest gray of her young life, this stray black cat was a single steady point of light. It asked for nothing but to be acknowledged, and in return, it gave her back a piece of herself she thought was lost forever. The capacity to hope, to connect, to trust that the world might still hold kindness, even if it came on 4 quiet paws and had green knowing eyes. The trust was there, fragile but real. It was enough for now to build a tomorrow on. The world, for a little while, found a new kind of balance. A rhythm built on tuna and trust, on silent walks and slow blinks. The sharp, jagged edges of Maya's grief were still there, but now they were wrapped in something softer, something warmer. The cat, her cat, was a constant, a living, breathing anchor in the turbulent sea of her life. She'd even given it a name, whispered only in her mind. Shadow. Not because it followed her, but because it felt like a protective darkness, a shelter. But wild things by their very nature are never truly tamed. They are creatures of pattern and instinct, and their loyalties are often split between the heart and the wild call of their own secret lives. The shift started so subtly that Maya almost missed it. It was the third week of their routine. The morning air had turned biting, a dry cold that made the skin on your cheeks feel tight. Frost etched delicate, feathery patterns on the windshields of parked cars. Maya came out, her lunchbox in one hand, a small portion of leftover roast chicken in a plastic bag in the other. She'd started saving bits from dinner, her dad quietly noticing and leaving a little extra on his plate for her to take. She looked toward the pickup truck. The green eyes were there, watching. But they didn't immediately emerge. The cat was sitting, not in its usual ready-to-follow posture, but hunched, its body low to the ground. When it finally did step out, its movement was different. It wasn't its usual fluid, silent glide. It moved with a slight stiffness, a hesitation in its left hind leg. It ate the chicken she offered, but quickly, with a distracted air, its ears constantly swiveling, scanning the street behind her, the yards across, the road. Its focus was fractured. "You okay, Shadow?" Maya whispered. The cat finished the chicken, licked its lips once, and then, instead of falling into step behind her, it turned and looked directly down the street, in the opposite direction of the school. Its entire body was tense, a bowstring, pulled tight. It took a single step that way, then stopped, conflicted. It looked back at Maya, then down the street again. It made a sound then, the first sound Maya had ever heard it make beyond the crunch of food or the pad of its feet. A low, quiet chirrup, a trill that seemed stuck in its throat. It was a sound of urgency. Then it made its choice. It gave Maya one last, almost apologetic glance, and then it was moving, loping away down the sidewalk with that slight favoring hitch in its gait, its tail low. It didn't look back. Within seconds, it had vanished around the corner. Maya stood on the sidewalk, the empty plastic bag dangling from her fingers. The cold suddenly felt deeper, more invasive. The walk to school that day was longer than it had ever been. The silence was no longer a comfortable shared space. It was a void. She kept glancing over her shoulder, hoping to see the black shape materialize, but the sidewalk remained empty. The ritual was broken. For the first time in weeks, she faced the schoolyard gate alone. She didn't turn to give a slow blink. There was no one to receive it. The whole school day felt muffled, distant. Mrs. Welty's lessons on multiplication tables seemed to happen in another room. All Maya could think about was the hitch in its step, the look in its eyes, the sound of that strained chirrup. Was it hurt? Was it sick? The fear was a cold knot in her stomach. The fragile world of trust she'd built was showing cracks. The next day, the cat was back. It was waiting under the truck, and it ate the food she offered with a voracious hunger she hadn't seen before. It was like it hadn't eaten in days. Its fur was matted with what looked like cobwebs and dust, and there was a fresh, thin scratch across its nose. But it followed her to school. It performed the slow blink at the fence. Relief washed over Maya so powerfully her knees felt weak. It was okay. It had just been busy. It had its own life. She understood that. But the pattern had been set. The cat's disappearances became a part of their new, uneasy normal. It wouldn't be there every morning. Sometimes it would miss 2, even 3 days in a row. And each time it returned, it looked a little more worn, a little more ragged. Its sleekness was gone, replaced by a perpetually rumpled, tired appearance. It was always hungry, always thirsty. It would follow her, but its mind often seemed elsewhere, its ears constantly tracking sounds Maya couldn't hear. And then, the gifts started. The first one appeared on a Tuesday. The cat had been gone for 2 days. Maya had walked to school, wrapped in a fresh layer of worry, her stomach in a constant low-grade clench. When she came out for afternoon recess, she instinctively looked toward the brick wall where it usually waited for the school day to end. It wasn't there. Her heart sank. But then she looked down. Right at the base of the fence, directly in line with her classroom window, was a small gray feather. A dove's feather, soft and perfect. It could have been windblown. It could have been coincidence. But it was placed so neatly, so deliberately. She picked it up, its veins soft against her skin. She looked around, searching for the cat, but saw nothing. She tucked the feather into the pocket of her jeans, a tiny, mysterious comfort. 2 days later, after another absence, there was a smooth, milk-white stone, the kind you'd find in a riverbed, not on a suburban sidewalk. It was placed in the same spot. Then, a few days after that, a discarded red ribbon, frayed and faded by the sun, curled into a small circle. Every time the cat returned from one of its mysterious journeys, it would leave a small, seemingly worthless token at the base of the fence, an offering, an apology, a proof of life. Maya started a small collection on her windowsill at home. The feather, the stone, the ribbon. They were her treasures. They were proof that even when it was gone, it was thinking of her. It was trying to communicate. But the mystery of where it went, and why it was coming back looking so exhausted, began to eat at her. The worry was a constant hum under her skin. She started paying closer attention to its behavior. She noticed it would always vanish in the same direction. East, down toward the old part of the neighborhood, where the houses were farther apart and the woods began to creep back in. She noticed the hitch in its leg never got better, but it never got worse either. One afternoon, she tried to follow it. She saw it beginning to get that distracted, restless look halfway through their walk home. Instead of going inside, she told her dad she was going to play on the porch. She watched. The cat. It paced for a moment, then sat and began to groom its left paw with intense concentration. It licked and licked at the pads, and then, in a moment of startling clarity, Maya saw it. Wrapped around its paw, digging into the tender skin between its pads, was a thin, almost invisible strand of blue plastic, like the kind from a 6-pack of soda cans. A litter trap. It was hurting itself, trying to chew it off. Her breath caught. That was the source of the limp. That was the pain it had been carrying. Before she could move, could even think of trying to help, the cat's head snapped up. It stared east, its body freezing into absolute stillness. That same focused intensity from the first time it vanished returned. The plastic on its paw was forgotten. It chirruped, that urgent, truncated sound, and then it was off, running with a lopsided gait into the gathering dusk. Maya stood on the porch, her hand pressed to her mouth. The image of the plastic cutting into its paw was burned into her mind. It was hurt. It was in pain. And yet, something else, something even more powerful than its own discomfort, was calling it away. What was it? Another food source? A rival cat? A secret shelter? The gifts, the absences, the injury, it all coalesced into a deep, thrumming anxiety. This wasn't just a cat living a stray's life. This was a creature torn, pulled in 2 different directions by 2 powerful competing instincts. One was its bond with her, a bond of warm food and quiet companionship. The other was something darker, more desperate, something that left it injured and exhausted. Do you think animals know when we're at our lowest? They do. They feel the vibrations of our pain like a rumble in the earth. But they have their own pains, their own desperate struggles that we can't always see. The balance was gone, replaced by a fearful equilibrium. The cat would come, and it would give her its quiet presence, and it would leave its small, pathetic gifts. And then it would answer its other call, returning a little more worn, a little more frayed at the edges each time. Maya stopped sleeping well. She'd lie in bed and stare at the feather and the stone on her windowsill, lit by the ghostly blue light of the moon. She'd listen for the sound of a fight, for the yowl of a cat in distress. She started having a recurring dream. In it, the cat was trying to lead her somewhere, but its mouth was moving without sound and she couldn't understand what it was trying to say. She'd wake up with a start, her heart pounding, a sense of impending loss clinging to her like a cold sweat. She knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that this couldn't last. The cat was running itself into the ground. It was trying to maintain two separate lives, and it was failing. Something was going to give. The pattern was building toward a breaking point. The cliffhanger came on a Friday. It had been a normal morning. The cat was there. It had eaten. It had followed her to school with no sign of its usual distraction. It seemed present, calm. At the fence, it delivered its slow blink, and Maya, feeling a wave of relief, gave one back. It felt like old times. Maybe the mysterious pull had released it. Maybe whatever had been calling it was over. She went through her school day feeling lighter than she had in days. When the final bell rang, she packed her backpack quickly, almost eagerly, ready for their quiet walk home. She pushed through the double doors and out into the afternoon sun, her eyes automatically scanning the brick wall for her friend. The wall was empty. Her smile faded. She walked to their spot by the fence. There was no gift today, just empty sidewalk. A heavy disappointment settled in her chest. Maybe it had just gotten bored and wandered off. She turned to start her lonely walk home, and that's when she saw it. A flash of black fur, moving fast, low to the ground, darting between the azalea bushes that lined the school property. It was the cat, and it wasn't leaving. It was running, toward the school, toward the playground. And it was crying, not meowing, not chirruping. This was a sound Maya had never heard from it, a sound that ripped through the calm autumn air and froze the blood in her veins. It was a high, piercing, desperate wail, a sound of pure, unadulterated panic. It was a scream. It ignored her completely, its green eyes wide and wild with a terror she could feel from 20 feet away. It streaked past her, a black bolt of lightning, its injured leg forgotten, its focus absolute. It leaped onto the playground fence, scrambled over the top, and hit the wood-chip ground running, heading straight for the swarm of children on the jungle gym. Maya stood rooted to the spot, her backpack slipping from her shoulder, her heart hammering against her ribs. The world seemed to slow down, the children's laughter warping into a distant, muffled roar. The cat had never come into the schoolyard. It had never made a sound like that. It had never, ever looked at her without seeing her. Something was terribly, terribly wrong. And her silent, mysterious friend was racing right into the heart of it. The world didn't just slow down. It shattered into a million sharp, glittering pieces. The sound of the cat's wail was a needle that pierced the bubble of the ordinary afternoon, and everything after happened in a horrifying, crystal-clear slow motion. Maya's feet were moving before her brain could even form a thought, her abandoned backpack a forgotten heap on the ground. She shoved through the school gate, her eyes locked on the black streak of fur as it tore across the wood chips. Kids stopped mid-swing, mid-climb, mid-laugh, turning to watch the chaotic blur. A teacher's aide, Ms. Evans, shouted, "Hey, get that animal out of here!" But her voice sounded thin and far away, drowned out by the frantic drumming of Maya's own heart. The cat wasn't running wildly. Its path was terrifyingly direct. It bypassed the jungle gym, ignored the slide, and shot toward the far corner of the playground, a less popular area shaded by a large, overgrown fir tree. Its low-hanging branches created a dark, hidden cave that kids sometimes used for games of hide-and-seek, and it was headed straight for that darkness. Maya followed, her breath catching in ragged sobs, not from exertion, but from pure, undiluted fear. The cat's cry had been a key, unlocking a primal part of her that understood, on a level deeper than language, that this was a warning. This was an alarm bell ringing only for her. She reached the edge of the fir tree's shadow just as the cat disappeared into the dense, needled darkness beneath the branches. She dropped to her hands and knees, the rough wood chips digging into her palms, and crawled in after it. The air under the tree was still and cold, smelling sharply of damp earth and pine. The sunlight was completely blocked out, leaving a dim, greenish twilight. It took a second for her eyes to adjust, and then she saw. The cat was no longer running. It was standing rigid, its back arched, its fur puffed out to twice its size, making it look like a terrifying specter. Its lips were pulled back in a silent, desperate snarl, revealing sharp, needle-like teeth. It was hissing, a sound like escaping steam, low and continuous, and filled with a venomous rage Maya didn't know it possessed. It was staring, its entire being focused on a point in the deepest dark of the tree's hollow. Maya followed its line of sight, and her blood went from ice to fire in a single heart-stopping second. There was a man, crouched in the dirt, his back against the school's brick wall. He was huddled there, as if trying to make himself small, to disappear into the shadows. He was wearing a dark hoodie, even though the day wasn't that cold, and the hood was pulled up, and in his arms he was holding something, a little girl. She was maybe 5, a kindergartner. She was curled against his chest, her face hidden, her body limp. She wasn't moving. The man had one hand clamped tightly over the little girl's mouth. His other arm was wrapped around her waist, holding her locked to his body. His eyes, wide and startled and glinting in the dim light, were fixed on the snarling, spitting animal that had just erupted into his hiding place. Time didn't just stop, it vaporized. Every lesson about strangers, every warning from her dad, every scary story she'd ever heard, it all collapsed into this one, horrifying, undeniable reality. This was wrong. This was so deeply, fundamentally wrong. The man wasn't comforting a hurt child. He was hiding. He was silencing her. He was stealing her. The cat's hiss escalated into another one of those piercing, unearthly wails. It took a threatening step forward, a predator's step, its body low to the ground. It wasn't afraid. It was furious. It was a mother bear, a guardian wolf, a force of pure, righteous protection. The man flinched back, pressing himself harder against the wall. "Get out of here," he hissed back, his voice a tight, nervous rasp. He jerked his leg, trying to kick out at the cat, but the space was too confined. The movement jostled the little girl. A small, muffled whimper escaped from under his hand. The sound was tiny, terrified. It was the sound that broke the last of Maya's paralysis. She didn't think. She didn't plan. A sound tore from her own throat, a scream that was raw and powerful, and nothing like her own voice. "Help! Somebody help!" Her voice, shrill and piercing, cut through the hissing and the whispered threats. The man's eyes, wide with a new kind of panic now, snapped from the cat to her. His face twisted from startled fear into something ugly and desperate. That's when the cat attacked. It didn't go for his legs. It launched itself through the air, a black comet of teeth and claws, straight for the arm that was clamped over the little girl's mouth. It sank its teeth into the man's wrist and hooked its claws into his forearm, holding on with a terrifying, primal ferocity. The man yelled out in pain and shock, a raw, guttural sound. His hand jerked away from the little girl's face, instinctively, trying to shake the wild animal off of him. The little girl, her mouth free, drew in a huge, gasping breath, and then let out a true, ear-splitting scream of terror. It was a sound that could not be ignored, that would carry across the entire playground. The man was scrambling now, trying to stand up, trying to dislodge the cat that was latched onto his arm, a whirlwind of pain and fury. He was shouting, cursing. Swatting at it with his free hand, Maya didn't wait. She scrambled forward on her knees, her own tears blurring her vision. She didn't look at the man. She didn't look at the struggling cat. She focused only on the little girl, whose eyes were wide with terror, who was now crying uncontrollably. Maya grabbed her under the arms, pulling with all her might. "Come on! Come on!" she cried. The little girl, spurred by instinct, kicked her legs, helping Maya pull her free from the man's loosened grip. They tumbled backward together, out, from under the lowest branches of the tree, into the shocking brightness of the afternoon sun. The world rushed back in at a deafening volume. The screams had been heard. Ms. Evans was sprinting across the playground, her face a mask of alarm. 2 other teachers were close behind her. The playground was erupting into chaos. Children crying, teachers shouting questions. Ms. Evans skidded to a halt in front of them, her eyes taking in the scene. Maya and a sobbing kindergartner tangled together on the ground, both pale and trembling. And from under the tree came the sounds of a struggle, a man's pained shouts, and the continuing savage snarling of an animal. "Call the police! Now!" Ms. Evans yelled to another teacher, her voice cracking with authority. She didn't hesitate. She dropped to her knees, gathering both girls into her arms, pulling them away from the tree, creating a protective barrier with her own body. It's okay. You're safe. You're safe," she murmured, her own voice shaking. The next few minutes were a blur of sirens, flashing lights, and overwhelming noise. Police officers arrived, swarming the playground. They converged on the fir tree. There were shouts of, "Police! Show me your hands!" The snarling from under the tree had stopped, replaced by the man's sobbing pleas. Maya, clinging to Ms. Evans, couldn't tear her eyes away from the dark space under the branches. Her entire body was trembling uncontrollably. She watched as the officers dragged the man out. He was a mess. His hood was down, revealing a young, tear-streaked face contorted in pain and fear. His right arm was a bloody mess of scratches and punctures, his sleeve shredded. He was crying, saying something about just wanting to talk to her. But the words were lost in the chaos. The little girl was whisked away by a paramedic, wrapped in a silver blanket, her cries softening into hiccuping sobs as she was reunited with her frantic teacher. And then, it was over. The immediate danger was gone. The man was in a police car. The children were being calmed and accounted for. The adrenaline that had flooded Maya's system began to recede, leaving her feeling hollow, shaky, and desperately cold. She remembered. The cat," she whispered, her voice hoarse from screaming. She pulled away from Miss Evans. "Where's the cat?" She stumbled back toward the fir tree just as an officer was emerging from the branches, holding something carefully in his gloved hands. It was the cat. It was limp, its body hanging like a rag doll. Its eyes were closed. Its black fur was matted and dark with something wet that wasn't just water. Maya's heart stopped. A soundless scream built in her chest, a pressure so immense it felt like it would crack her ribs. The officer looked down at the small, still body in his hands, his face grim. "Brave little thing," he muttered, almost to himself. "He put up one heck of a fight. He probably saved that little girl's life." He shook his head. "I think the guy got a lucky kick in, or he just gave everything he had. He thought it was dead." The world narrowed to a single devastating point. The cat. Her shadow. Her silent, mysterious friend who brought her feathers and walked 10 paces behind her. Who had just thrown its entire being into a nightmare to save. A stranger. Who had spent its last ounce of strength, not on running away, but on protecting. It couldn't be gone. It couldn't. A sob finally broke free from Maya's throat. She took a stumbling step forward, her hand outstretched, and then, a miracle. The cat's body twitched. A shudder ran through it. Its head, which had been lolling, lifelessly, lifted a fraction of an inch. One eye, the brilliant green barely visible through a squint of pain, cracked open. It scanned the blurry faces until it found hers. It looked at her, through the pain, through the exhaustion, through the fading veil of unconsciousness. It looked directly into Maya's eyes. And then, with an effort that seemed to cost it everything, it began to purr. It wasn't a loud, happy purr. It was a ragged, rattling vibration, like a tiny broken engine trying desperately to turn over. It was a sound of immense pain and profound relief. It was the most beautiful and heartbreaking sound Maya had ever heard. The officer's eyes widened, in surprise. "Well, I'll be," he breathed. "Hang on, little fella, hang on." But Maya was already moving. She didn't care about the blood. She didn't care about the gloves. She pushed forward and, with a tenderness she didn't know she possessed, she laid her small, trembling hand on the cat's head, right between its torn ears. The cat didn't flinch. It didn't hiss. It pressed its head up into her palm, a desperate, seeking pressure. The ragged purr intensified, vibrating through her hand and up her arm, straight into her shattered heart. In that single, unmistakable gesture, the last puzzle piece clicked into place. Maya finally understood. She saw it all. The mysterious absences, the exhaustion, the desperate need to be in two places at once. The cat hadn't just been living a stray's life. It had been a guardian. It had been watching over the schoolyard, this territory, long before Maya ever started walking to school. Its other life, its other pull, was this instinct to protect the small and the vulnerable. It had been patrolling, checking perimeters, following sounds and scents the humans couldn't perceive. It had sensed a wrongness, a danger lurking, and it had tried to warn them all with its strange behavior. And when the final moment came, it had done what a human couldn't. It had become the weapon. It had become the alarm. It had given its body to the fight. It had been trying to tell her all along. And now, broken and bleeding in a police officer's hands, it was telling her one last thing. It was saying, "I see you. I trust you. I'm here." The understanding was a physical wave that washed over her, so powerful it buckled her knees. Ms. Evans caught her, holding her up. Maya kept her hand on the cat's head, her tears falling onto its blood-matted fur. "It's a hero," the officer said softly, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't hide. "A real hero." Maya nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She understood now. The love this animal had given her wasn't just about quiet companionship. It was a fierce, brave, protective love. And it had just extended that love to save a life. The mystery was solved. The weight of it, the glorious, terrifying weight of what this small creature had done, finally settled on her small shoulders. And she knew, with a certainty that would shape the rest of her life, that she would never let it go. The ride to the animal hospital was a blur of sirens and streetlights and the ragged, rattling sound of the cat's purr. Maya refused to let go. She sat in the back of the police cruiser, the cat, her shadow, cradled in her lap on a clean towel an officer had produced. Her dad was in the front passenger seat, his face pale and stunned, having been pulled from his car by an officer and given the most unbelievable summary of events. He kept turning around to look at her, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe, repeating her name like a prayer. Maya. Oh, my Maya. But Maya wasn't really there. Her entire world had shrunk to the space between her hands and the fragile, broken body she held. She could feel the faint, fluttering beat of its heart against her leg. She could feel the wet, warm seep of blood through the towel. She talked to it the whole way, her voice a low, steady whisper. A secret stream of words meant only for them. "You're okay. You're so brave. Just hold on. We're almost there. Please hold on." The purr would come and go, a sputtering engine on its last drops of fuel, kicking back to life every time her voice found it. The animal hospital was a whirl of bright lights and sterile smells and urgent voices. A veterinary technician, her scrubs covered in cartoon puppies, met them at the door, her professional calm not quite masking her shock at seeing a police escort. She gently but firmly took the cat from Maya's arms, laying it on a waiting gurney. "We'll take it from here, sweetheart," she said, her eyes soft. "You did good. You got him here." Maya's hands felt instantly, terribly empty. She watched as they wheeled her friend away through swinging double doors, into a place she couldn't follow. The silence that rushed in to fill the space where the purring had been was deafening. Her dad's arm came around her shoulders, pulling her into his side. She buried her face in his jacket and finally, truly, cried. Great, heaving sobs that shook her whole body, releasing the terror, the adrenaline, the overwhelming tidal wave of what had just happened. They sat in the waiting room for hours. The police came and took a statement, their voices hushed and respectful. The story began to trickle out. News vans gathered outside. The parents of the little girl, a child named Lily, arrived, their faces streaked with tears of unimaginable relief. They hugged Maya, held her hands, called her an angel. But Maya didn't feel like an angel. She felt small and scared and desperately worried about her friend. The real hero was behind those double doors, fighting. The vet finally emerged, her face etched with exhaustion. Maya and her dad shot to their feet. "He's a tough one," the vet said, and the use of the word he felt significant. He was no longer an it, he was a patient, a person. He's stable. It was touch and go for a bit. He lost a lot of blood. He's got a concussion, 2 cracked ribs, and that leg, that plastic was dug in deep. It's caused a pretty severe infection. We've cleaned him up, put him on IV antibiotics and fluids, and given him something for the pain. He's sleeping now. Can I see him? Maya's voice was a rasp. The vet smiled, a tired, genuine smile. For a minute, he's pretty out of it. They led her back into the treatment area. He was in a large incubator, a tiny figure surrounded by wires and blankets. He looked small and vulnerable, nothing like the fierce whirlwind of teeth and claws from under the tree. An IV was taped to his front leg, his side was shaved and bandaged, but he was breathing. Steady, even breaths. Maya pressed her hand against the glass of the incubator. "Hi, Shadow," she whispered. His ear twitched. Just the tiniest flicker. He was dreaming. Maybe he was dreaming of her. They went home long, after midnight. The house felt different. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was waiting. Maya slept fitfully, her dreams filled with green eyes and snarling, and the sound of a little girl's scream. She woke up expecting to see the cat on her windowsill, and the emptiness there was a fresh ache every time. The next day, the story exploded. It was on the local news, then the national news. Stray cat hero saves girl from abduction. The video from the school security cameras, showing the black streak racing across the playground, was played on a loop. The story of the mysterious cat that followed a little girl to school every day captured the world's heart. Donations started pouring into the animal hospital to cover his medical bills. Cards and gifts and cans of tuna arrived by the boxload. Maya's dad would sit with her at the kitchen table, reading the letters aloud, his voice often catching. People wrote about their own pets, about loss, about hope. They called the cat a guardian angel, a spirit, a miracle. Maya didn't care about any of that. She only cared about the twice daily visits to the hospital. She would sit by his cage, reading her homework aloud to him, telling him about the kids at school who now looked at her with a new kind of respect. She told him about the feather and the stone on her windowsill. She told him she'd saved him some chicken. Slowly, day by day, he came back to them. The purr returned, stronger and less rattly. He started to eat on his own. He would headbutt her hand through the cage bars when she visited. The vet said his recovery was remarkable. "He's got a lot to live for," she said, smiling at Maya. After a week, he was well enough to come home. The hospital staff lined up to say goodbye, as Maya carried him out in a brand new carrier, a gift from the staff. He was wearing a little blue cone around his head and he hated it. But he was alive. He was theirs. The first night he was home, he explored every inch of the house, sniffing corners, rubbing his cone against furniture. Reclaiming the territory he'd only ever observed from the outside. He found the sofa, leaped up with a slight grunt of effort from his healing ribs, and curled into a tight black circle, his purr a contented rumble. He was home. Life didn't go back to normal. It found a new, softer normal. The cat, whom they officially named Shadow, became the center of their world. He slept at the foot of Maya's bed every night, a warm, purring weight that kept the bad dreams at bay. He would still follow her to school, but now he walked right beside her, his shoulder brushing against her leg. He'd wait for her at the gate each afternoon, and the slow blink they shared was no longer a secret promise, but a proud, public declaration. Maya's dad changed too. The permanent fog of grief that had clung to him began to lift. Caring for Shadow gave him a purpose, a focus outside of his own pain. He'd laugh when Shadow would bat at his shoelaces while he tried to tie them. He'd proudly tell the story to anyone who would listen, his chest puffed out. The house, which had been so quiet for so long, was filled with new sounds. The crunch of kibble, the scratch of a litter box, the deep, rumbling purr of a contented cat. It was alive again. The storm had passed. The heroics were over. But the final gift, the one that truly sealed their new life together, came on a quiet afternoon a month later. Maya was sitting on the back porch steps, doing her math homework. Shadow was lying in a patch of sun nearby, meticulously grooming his now sleek black fur, the cone and bandages long gone. He suddenly stopped his washing, his head cocking. He got up, trotted across the lawn, and disappeared into the thick bushes along the fence line. Maya smiled. He still did that sometimes, vanishing on his little patrols, his instincts never fully fading. She went back to her fractions. A few minutes later, he emerged. He walked straight to her and dropped something at her feet. It was his offering, his gift. Maya looked down. It was the thin, twisted strand of blue plastic, the soda can ring that had been dug into his paw for weeks. It was dirty and weathered, but it was the same one. He had gone back, found it, and brought it to her. He laid it at her feet like a knight presenting his sword to his queen. He looked up at her, his green eyes clear and intelligent, and let out a soft, questioning meow. It wasn't a cry of pain or a wail of alarm. It was a simple, domestic sound. A question. See? I brought it for you. Tears welled in Maya's eyes, but they were warm tears. Tears of completion. This was it. This was the final piece. He wasn't just giving her a token. He was giving her the source of his pain. He was trusting her with his deepest vulnerability. He was saying, I don't need to carry this anymore. I am safe now. We are safe. She picked up the piece of plastic. It was light, almost weightless, but it held the weight of everything. She held it in her palm, and then she reached out and stroked his head, her fingers tracing the small pale scar above his eye. He leaned into her touch, his purr erupting instantly, a deep, powerful motor of pure contentment. She kept the plastic. She didn't put it on the windowsill with the feather and the stone. She put it in a small wooden box her mom had once kept earrings in. It was a private relic, a reminder that sometimes the bravest, most heroic things are born from pain, and that trust isn't the absence of fear, but the choice to hand your deepest hurt to someone else and know they will keep it safe. The mornings were lighter now. The nights were less heavy. Shadow was their steady comfort, their living, purring reminder that love can find you in the darkest of places, even if it's a little scarred and missing a few pieces, and arrives on 4 quiet paws. He had saved Lily, yes, but he had also saved them. He had pulled a father and daughter back from the edge of their grief and given them a reason to open their hearts again. He had taught them that a second chance isn't about going back to the way things were, but about building something new and beautiful from the pieces that were left behind. You stayed till the end. Thank you. If it felt like a soft hug or a warm purr in your heart, subscribing lets me bring you more moments like this.